My name is Emma Martin, and this is the Lazy Keto Mum Podcast. If you are looking for help with keto and low carb, you have come to the right place.
Hey guys, my name's Emma Martin. I'm the Lazy Keto Mum, and I have a wonderful guest speaker with me today, Dr. Vera Tarman. Vera, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. What an interesting title you have, the Lazy Keto Mum. That's great.
Well, it comes really from a passion of teaching people how to get off sugar, how to make food recovery easy. And I heard your topic at the Quit Sugar Summit, and I believe you've just spoken at Low Carb
USA.
Ours is called Low Carb Down Under. We were just having a chat about that. What really resonated with me was the message that you were sharing about food addiction and, sugar addiction, but also what happens in our brain and it being more than just food, because we're so conditioned to think about what's happening in our diet and we forget about all the other stuff that our body's doing with us. So you're an addiction specialist. You're a medical director at one of Canada's largest treatment centres, and you've written a book called Food Junkies: Recovery from Food Addiction, and you're passionate about sharing food addiction. You have a group which we'll talk about in a bit. I'm interested to know, firstly, what led you to this journey?
Okay, well, this is those of us who are passionate about this field of food addiction, we always have our own personal story behind the professional veneer. And my personal story is pretty much the story of almost every young woman in university, which was that I thought I was fat and didn't like how I looked and I had to lose weight. And I look at pictures now and I just can't believe that I thought that. But that's what I did, because that's what we do. We always think that we need to be better. And so I got caught in that whole restricting, which then led to binging, which led to basically an eating disorder. And it just became overwhelming, and it just took over my life, basically. And I was, obviously still able to go to school, still able to travel, but it just dominated my mental well-being, my mental health. And I'm giving you the super short version because we don't have that much time. But I did learn, it took me basically until I was 50 years old, well into my addiction work. I was, working as an addictions physician, where it finally clued to me that it wasn't an eating disorder that I had. It wasn't just I'm on diets, yo-yo dieting back and forth, like so many people I knew in my cohort. It was an addiction. It was addictive behavior. And this was early on. So I've been sort of sugar sober free now for 15 to 20 years. It's probably 15 years. And then I include flour in there. And so I have different sobriety dates, as it were. But sugar is between 15 and 20 years, depending on what you count, because I quit alcohol, and alcohol is fermented sugar. So if I include alcohol, it's 15 years. And it was when I did that mental state that never left me, that negative, like always thinking about food or how many calories am I burning and should I work out more and all that stuff, went away. And it was when I stopped eating those foods. And then I started reading about that. So it's 15 years ago. And there wasn't very much information. Like it was really a few people talking about it, but not very many. But I searched high and low and found some information in the addiction literature. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go with this. And it worked for me. And then, once you start understanding the concept of sugar addiction, you can't unforget it, and you can't not see it anymore. And there I am working with my patients. I'm following now this addiction paradigm, and now I'm seeing how other people do or don't. And when they did, not only did they get free of their sugar obsession, they also got free of their other addictions. Like it's all addiction is addiction is addiction. And there's a lot of people who they get clean from one thing only to shift over to another, and they're not free. The addictive thoughts continue. But if you figure out what it is you're addicted to, and folks, if you're eating sugar, that's high on the list, you're not going to get free of the obsession. You might lose weight, you might look good, but you won't be free of the obsession until you stop that stuff. And that's basically, so it's a personal story, which has become a professional story.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm glad you touched on that, because I think the bulk of people listening or watching this would have had that similar thing. I remember looking back at photographs when I was, 15 and feeling like a hippopotamus, but, just being like a normal everyday human. I'm like, if only I was that skinny well.
Yeah.
But
It's
it
just
does, it
incredible.
becomes an obsession.
Yeah, it does. It
What?
becomes an obsession. Yeah.
It
And
does.
even when I lost weight, I still was obsessed. Then I was obsessed about then I was obsessed about the idea that, well, now that I've lost weight, surely I can eat a little bit now, have a little bit, and then I would eat weight. And then there was the whole obsession of that, watching that gradual weight gain, because it's always losing and then gaining. And what a life that is.
I think you also said something really interesting about getting off that cycle. I don't know how you put it, but what I heard was to be free from the food slavery and free
Yes.
from the food cravings, and
Yes.
the fact that you don't have to count calories or do crazy exercise. And it goes so far against what we've been told. Like, what's your take on how we kind of got here? Like, what's happening in our brains?
Yeah, well, okay, so I mean, the story really begins long before my life began. It began like 100 years ago with the processed food industry. And, if we were to map out, and there's actually books that do a really good job about writing about the food industry, like Michael Moss's Salt, Sugar, Fat, Gary Taubes and his whole sugar and end of sugar. They do a really good job about illustrating the history of the food industry, particularly the sugar industry. I mean, sugar's been dominant. It's been a drug, just like opium, for years, but it wasn't as available. It was expensive. But in the last 50, 60, 70 years, it's become ubiquitous. It's cheap. It's cheaper than soda. It's cheaper than water. Like, I don't know, it's unless you drink tap water. So it's become, it really, the background is that there's been the exposure to basically sugary foods. And you can say, like, I don't just talk about sugar addiction, I talk about food addiction. And the rebuttal I always get is, come on, you can't be addicted to food, we have to eat. But it usually starts with sugar addiction, and we don't have to eat that sugary stuff. We eat normal foods like vegetables. And, if you do eat proteins and fats, we eat that. Those things are not addictive. Now, they might be later on once a person is in full-blown food addiction, but in the early stages, that like early and middle stage, they're not addictive. And if we weren't eating addictive foods, we wouldn't be addicted. If I walk by somebody who's smoking a cigarette, I'm not going to become a smoker. But if I start smoking the cigarette, even one or two, I'm not really going to become, but if I start doing it every day, a few times a day, eventually I become a smoker. And sugar is essentially like tobacco. It's it may look normal because we normalize it thanks to the food industry and the holiday industry and everything else, but it's not. Normal is low carb foods. And low carb in the context that I mean it is, I just mean non-refined, basically not refined foods and not sugar. That's any kind of vegetable. And of course, all of the proteins and fats like meats and whatever.
Yeah, real food. I think, obviously I follow keto and low carb or lazy keto. And I think the thing I teach people is pick a protein, add a healthy fat, above the ground veg. And I think to keep it so simple and teach people about what is real food, because it what 80% of our food isn't real?
Isn't real. And if we ate that real food, there would be very few food addicts amongst us, just like there weren't 100 years ago, except for the extreme wealthy. Like, we look at pictures of Henry VIII, like he was like as big as he was wide. And of course, because that's all he did was eat, and he had the money to eat. But most of us, we didn't have that capacity. So food addiction developed only really in the last number of years, basically parallel to the diabetic and the obesity crisis. I actually think all three of them are very much related.
You mentioned some interesting people to listen to, Gary Taubes, and immediately Nina Schultz sprang to mind. I'm like, there are so many great people to actually listen to. With the addiction cycle in our brain.
Yes, I should talk about that.
Yeah, you're perfectly positioned to talk about that. Why are these foods so damn addictive?
Right. Okay. Thank you. Because you did ask me to address that, and I got caught up in the food industry thing. So what happens?
It's not hard to do, is it?
What happens is the food industry knows the addictive circuitry in our brain, and it directly, it's like it knows exactly what to do, what to turn us on, so that we eat foods that we are, even as we're eating it, we're saying, I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm just going to finish this box. Let me just finish what's in the fridge and then I'll stop. Like, this is all addiction. And it's essentially a hijacking of our brain. And what's happening in the brain, just as in a quick nutshell, is that we have reward chemicals. Essentially, the main key one is dopamine. It's not the only one, but it's the one we talk about the most. And dopamine is a normal neurochemical that motivates me to do things so that I'm not a slug sitting doing nothing on the couch. It's, well, if I get up and I do something, I have to be motivated to do it. Like, why would I get up? Well, because I want to do something. I want to talk to somebody, read a book, get a movie. I want to do something, or I'm interested, curious. That's dopamine. And so we need dopamine to be motivated to live, because life is, otherwise it would be an entire drudgery and we would essentially be depressed. So what happens is the food industry, or any drug, cocaine, crack, same thing. When a person is smoking crack, in that moment when they're smoking that crack, they know when they're not high, they know that their life is devastated. But when they start smoking the crack or the cocaine or whatever it is, in that 5 or 10 minutes that they're high, they are feeling like they are finally doing something for themselves. They're not, but that's the feeling. It's a feeling of, I'm doing something, I'm interested, I'm curious. So a drug gives you that normal feeling, but enhance it, and so does sugar. Not as big as cocaine, but more. So if I'm feeling depressed and low and I have a little bit of sugar, I'm feeling better, and of course, just like hypoglycemia, when you take too much sugar, then you crash. That happens with us too, with the dopamine. You're up a little high. It's not a normal amount, which would be real food or real behavior, like reading a book or something. You don't get high reading a book, but you get satisfied. When you take a drug, you get high, but then you crash. And when you crash, you need something so that you're not feeling awful. And it becomes this whirlwind cycle, or it's not a whirlwind, but it's a momentum that's getting worse and worse and worse. It's basically the dopamine that is too high and then too low and then too high and then too low. It's like hypoglycemia, but of dopamine in the brain. And then that sets itself up into a permanent fixture so that you're stuck in that place. And so now the only way to get out of that is you have to stop and quiet the whole dopamine circuitry. And that's what we call abstinence.
Well, that's kind of easier said than done, isn't it? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for explaining that, because it really does explain a lot. I remember being at a point where I would be swinging off the pantry door at 3 p.m.
Yes.
for my next fix. I just didn't understand what it was. And then I'd go through the whole guilt cycle and wondering why I was such a failure and why I couldn't beat this thing.
And when you were feeling such a failure, you were really low. And if you might be saying to yourself, I got to quit, but you don't know how long that low is going to last. And once things get kind of fixed and fused, it takes literally 10 days to 2 to 3 weeks to come back. It's not just like 10, unless you have sugar. But see what happens, you go down, you have sugar to go up, and then you go down again. It's a constant up and down, up and down. But if you finally stop, you go down and then you stay down and you stay down and you stay down. You stay down for day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. And it's not until day 14, day 15 that you gradually, it's like the body starts to recover. That's why we call it recovery. It recovers its natural dopamine circuitry. But that's a hellish time. And you're feeling awful that whole time, which is why we have treatment programs and medications and basically we lock people up for a month in a treatment center if the person can afford it. It's the best because you get lots of support while you're feeling horrible. And then at the end of it, you're back to not exactly normal, but more normal.
I think that's a really interesting point you raised about surrounding yourself with people who understand. Like when you first found this kind of journey, you shared your story of where you came from and how, your feelings about how, your physical body. When you hook into a group, like what does that give us mentally?
Oh, it's the analogy that I find the most helpful is think about when you're feeling that awful, like the way that you were describing, self-loathing and stuff like that. It's like you're in the pit of an ocean and it's dark and you're all by yourself because you feel like, what's wrong with me? Everybody else is okay, but there's something wrong with me. Like that's where everybody goes, is there's something wrong with me. But if you're in an ocean, I don't know, I think about the Titanic or something, and there's other people floating around and somebody grabs your hand, even if they're also in the same situation, just the fact that you're not alone makes a huge difference. And then, of course, if they're there, not alone, you're not alone, and they're saying, guess what, Vera? I actually hold on to my hand, hold on, because I'm going to pull you out. I'm going to help you out. Just follow me. Huge, 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 huge. And so just that makes a big difference. And then the other thing that's super important is being alone, the mind, because remember, our mind is hijacked, and our mind will talk us into all sorts of stupid stories like, I'm going to feel much better, Emma, if I have just a little bit of cake. But I'm trying to quit. It's day 5. I've gone this far. Yeah, but you know what? Just a little bit, and then you'll take the edge off, and then you'll make it to day 10. But if you're with somebody else who knows, they're going to say, no. Just sit. That's just called a craving. It sounds like a reasonable thought. It's masked as a reasonable thought, but it's actually a craving. It's actually the little devil, or the little bit, actually Bitten Johnson, I don't know if you've talked to her yet, calls it the red dog. It's the addiction. It's like another person inside of you that's whispering BS. And if you're in a group or in a setting, they'll say, no, don't listen. It's just a craving. In 20 minutes, it will pass. Just hold my hand. We're going to ride through it. You don't want to be alone in your addict mind. People say it's a neighborhood you don't want to be in alone. Your mind when you're
so right. We do feel alone, and we feel like we feel like, okay, I've failed again. And we make it all about the diet cycle, I suppose. And we don't understand what's happening behind the scenes. These little red puppets pulling the strings.
Exactly. Which is why I'm really happy to be speaking with people who are following a low carb food plan, for example, because that is in essence a food addiction friendly plan. It's a great plan. But if you don't understand the dynamic, it's not just about the food, then you might be tempted to think, you know what, I'm following low carb. I should be able to have one of those cheesecake treats that have no carbs because it's really just sweetener and it's almond flour and there's no carbs in that. But you know what? If it looks and if it becomes a trigger food, which it often is, because what is a cheesecake low carb or not look like? It looks like a cheesecake that you used to eat. That's a trigger. And it's like asking somebody, an alcoholic, to go into a bar and have a near beer. It doesn't work because it makes them just want the real thing. Once you learn, if you have an addictive tendency because of previous history and exposure in food, which I hope we talk about kids, because this is where that comes in, then you're going to have to be careful to avoid trigger foods. You can still eat exactly what you're doing, but and you will have peace with it because you're on a food addiction friendly plan. Just don't introduce trigger foods, which will upset the cart. Yeah.
I love what you've said there, because it's so, for me, it became about replacements. So my book is called The F Word, Confessions of a Cheesecake Lover. You probably weren't aware of that. The cheesecake thing. And for me, it was, I was so sugar addicted. I had to find replacements. And now they don't call me, but that's been a 4-year journey.
I know. Likewise, me, I had to use sweeteners for a long time. So that's actually one of the questions that we get asked a lot in the food addiction field is, what about sweeteners? And we say it's like harm reduction. It's like methadone for the opiate user. Use it because it's better. Now, it may not be better health-wise because, you can find all sorts of things that are wrong with sweeteners. But in terms of addiction, it's not as potent as sugar. And if it gets you off the sugar, then do it. But eventually you'll get even more peace when that's gone too.
Yeah, basically. Peace is the freedom. The freedom from the slavery is just life-changing.
Absolutely.
You mentioned kids, and I'm really glad you did, because so my daughter, she's 18, and of course she's in charge of her own food kind of now. She comes home to forage. So I make sure there's, good stuff in the fridge for her to raid. Yes. But what I've noticed, and she's been sort of sugar-free with me for 4 years, but what I've noticed is in her room, there's wrappers appearing. So candy wrappers and chocolate wrappers and stuff like that. So it's calling her again. And, she's a young adult. So I'm looking at her relapse and watching that with great interest. What are we doing to our kids, and what's happening in the minds of kids that we maybe as parents need to be aware of?
Yeah, this is it. So I'm impressed that she's done a 4-year sugar-free stint, because even just trying that, because it shows that she's got some kind of insight beyond what most teenagers have, and I'm going to attribute that to you. So, but most people, thank God for the low carb community, because that's bringing out more and more of the dangers of sugar, even if it's not mental. We're looking at it from the physical point of view, diabetes, obesity, etc. Thank God. But because what's happened is that, like I said, sugar is so ubiquitous, and partly what the sugar industry has done is it's normalized sugar so that it's okay to eat. And so when I hear parents say, and I just want to pull my hair out, and I try to be polite and not say anything, because they're not asking for my ranting at them. You're letting me rant, thank you. But I try not to rant to normal moms out there, because they don't want to hear it. Anyway, they'll say things like about their 8-year-old child, let them decide. And I can't tell them what to do. I can only, offer good stuff, but I can't tell them. And I want to say, but you wouldn't say that if they came home with a cigar. You wouldn't say, okay, I'll let you decide if you're going to smoke or not at 8 years old. I'll let you decide if you're going to drink, your dad's beer at 8 years old. We would just say, no, you're not going to have that. But we've got this thing about the drug called sugar that says it's normal and that we should let kids have it. And not only that, we should feed it to our kids, like our infants, through various formulas and infant food, that are full of sugar. And I'm just astounded by the foods that cereals and stuff like that. And so what that means is that kid is having a drug food from the get-go. It means that they're not eating real food, and therefore they're not neurodeveloping as well. And this is the part that scares me, they're developing an addictive pattern of use, that up and down thing. And we know that when kids smoke marijuana early, smoke cigarettes early, drink early, their likelihood of becoming addicted later, it's not like they're just going to experiment and put it down. The likelihood of staying with the addiction, the younger you are, the worse it is. It's the same with sugar. And so I see kids now, I know they're going to have trouble in their teens and 20s putting down the sugar. Now, I don't know if that's I'm talking about kids of the last 10 years, especially. Maybe just the fact that your daughter had a period of that means that she was able to stop. But even at her age, it once it comes back, like, you recognize that addictive pattern. That's what's happening. Hopefully she will recognize it. Hopefully she'll get fed up. And the main thing that you can do is reassure her, because she's probably feeling there's something wrong with my willpower. I had willpower before, and now I don't. Just to reassure, it's not that. It's essentially, it's a neural development. Because I do believe once you've had a little bit of addiction and you stop and then you return, it actually gets worse. That this is not a person's fault to just say, no, this is not you. Don't be ashamed. Don't hate yourself. This is just really an example of your body saying, I can't do this stuff, because I'll when you eat sugar, you gain weight. When you eat sugar, you start to become addicted. It's almost like a natural course of events.
Yeah, I think she's seen the benefits, being a teenager, and I was menopausing, and she was teenaging at the same time, and she's seen the benefits, so she knows what's possible. She lost weight, her skin cleared up, she coped better with things when she wasn't having sugar. And you're right. My kind of gut reaction as a parent is to go, no, and try and save her. But at the end of the day, you're right, that's just going to set her on a cycle that you and I went through. And I think,
So I think when you're younger, when she's younger, as a parent, the parent should say, no, we're not allowing this in the house. And your idea of, well, we'll have other stuff, healthy stuff. But once they get to the age where they're actually making their own minds up, like I think a teenager, you can't do that. You are going to, because that, a teenager is defiance. It's all about defiance. So you can't do that. But you can when the child is 3 years old, 5 years old, 8 years old. That's, I think, when parents need to say, no, we're just not eating this in the house. And, if you want to say, because if they truly are only eating once in a while, then they can have a little bit once in a while. It's if they're eating it all the time, you can't have it once in a while. But if you want your child eventually to live a life where they can have sugar on their birthday and on at Christmas, and that's it, like not every weekend, every night with a meal, but once in a while, then make sure that pattern stays. That it doesn't. Once you're doing it daily, it's much harder to go back to once in a while. But if you stay at the once in a while, moderation we call it, you might actually be able to stay at moderation and not develop the actual addiction.
Yeah, I think that's how we survive too, as like ancestrally, we might go and collect honey, but that was, we were really lucky to find honey and we damn well enjoyed it. And then there wasn't any.
Exactly. And then you weren't going crazy looking for it. But now we do go crazy looking for it, like literally.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Definitely calls us. And I'm thinking, okay, as you were speaking about that, I'm like, all right, well, I've learned that sugar and I guess those rewiring pathways start. So that would have started in her when she was inside me.
Yes.
And there's, that element of me that's going, oh, what have I done? But then, there's that guilt thing again.
Yeah, well, okay. So for moms who are listening now, there is actually, there's a couple of more, there are some people starting to write about this, and a person that's really good to read, if I would really suggest that you mention this, or I'll mention it, is Dr. Nicole Avena. And Dr. Nicole Avena, she's actually a researcher in the sugar addiction field. She's the study that showed that rats will choose sugar over cocaine. Like that's a real study. And she was one of the people that was part of that study. She also is a young mom, and she started to write this sort of side, because there's this whole genre of books called mommy books, apparently. And she's in that genre, and she's written about when you're pregnant, what to eat so that you don't predispose your child to addiction, like in terms of like from month 1 to 9 months, what you should avoid eating or not eat. And then once the baby is born, what to feed them so that they can eventually become moderate sugar eaters, because she actually believes that it's okay, because she's not a full-blown food addict. And I'm okay with that too, if it's that. So there is actually some guidance now on that. And she's got another book that's just come out for toddlers. I don't know. Anyway, it's a whole genre. And it does require having, like she has tips and tools. There's another book, it's called Sugar Proofing Your Kids, talking about, well, what do you do about Halloween and things like that? So that, again, moderate sugar, but not excessive. And it's targeted just for the mom population.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for bringing up those resources. So, okay, we've established that a lot of it's around guilt and food addiction. So let's say I assume I suspect I might have a food addiction. What do I do?
Okay, so the first thing that I would do, is learn and read about it, because, so I'd say read my book, and there's more and more information that's coming out there. Like the last 5 years, there's just, I don't want to say there's been an explosion, but there's definitely been more interest in this whole concept of food addiction. Thank God. So learn about it, and even learn about it before you quit sugar, because the thing about addiction, and you want to learn about the concept that sugar can be addictive, so that when you're sitting there going, should I or shouldn't I, you'll know that's actually just a manifestation of the withdrawal process. So learning about, well, what is sugar? Why is it addictive to me? Is it addictive? Yes, it is. And then what will happen when I withdraw? How long will the withdrawal? So that you don't get blindsided, because your brain is going to tell you that it's going to tell you any lie that it can to get you to relapse, basically. So that would be the first thing I do, is read up as much as possible. And you can, there are, like I said, more things out there. Then the next thing I would do is get support. Support is so important. Tell your friends, tell your partner, I'm going to quit sugar, because the number 3 is now you're going to quit sugar. So you want to get support though. So that means you're going to quit refined sugar, probably flour too, because flour is almost sugar. If you follow a low carb, you just say, I'm going to do keto, that'll work. That'll work. And then get people to support you. And how can they support you? By not offering you a little bit of sugar when you're having a bad day, not bringing in, donuts that smell to, whatever, or cake, or making something, here, I just made a cake, have some, like, to support that and to not give you a hard time. And then when you're starting to lose weight, to not say, oh my God, you look great, you can have a little bit now, to not do any of that nonsense. When you go to a buffet, they're going to help you to not go up and look at the dessert trolley. Support, you have to have support, especially in the home. And this is where it gets really hard, because what if the spouse doesn't want to? That's really hard. Then I would say get support if you're struggling, and maybe your level of addiction is more than just sugar, because it's a continual process, that a progressive condition, and more things can be addictive, like you're addicted to dairy maybe, or nuts, or like a lot of foods, and you're starting to go, I don't know what I can eat and what I can't. There are actually coaches out there but you want somebody who's food addiction friendly. And now we're starting to, since the keto and low carb world is more interested now in food addiction, we're going to start seeing people in that community who have food addiction knowledge, get help from them. And I have a Facebook group that's free that people can join, and then they can say, hey, this is my day 5. I did a great job. And then people will say, wonderful. Or they might say, what do you think about nuts? Can I have nuts? And then people will say, well, when you have a nut, what happens? Are you able to stop at 4 cashews? I can't. If I have a cashew in my hand, I want the whole box. It doesn't matter if I'm full, I still want more. So Vera can't have cashews. Can I have cashews? So you get that kind of support. And then you just have to hunker down. And I guess the main key thing is, once you've stopped, is do not have cheat days. I don't know what to call it.
I think a cheat day is a pretty good thing to call it.
Yeah, because cheat days only prolong the agony. You want to get through that worst withdrawal, and you only want to do it once. You don't want to do it 100 times in your life. You just want to, it's not pleasant. Do it once, get it done, and then don't pick up, because if you pick up, you're just going to put yourself back, and you have to do it again. And when you put yourself back, you might not be ready to do it again for another couple of years. You may say, oh no, I'm going to have a bit and quit. It's Saturday, I'll start again on Monday. I know people who say, I'll start again and quit on Monday, and it's 3 years Monday that they finally get back. The brain will tell you anything.
I'm starting on the 1st of February.
Thank you. Exactly. And this is addictive thinking. That's why I say you want to learn about this, so that you don't get caught in your own lies. And you want to have somebody around that says, no, Vera, this sounds like another lie. We call it the lies we tell ourselves.
Yeah, and we're so good at believing what that stuff that's going on, because that's how we're built, isn't it?
Yes. And I will say, overall, the process is very simple. You just stop, but it's not easy. That's the phrase we say in addiction. It's simple, but it's not easy. It's easier if you do it with support, though.
I absolutely agree. And I think that's where real food comes in, because if you think about, could you eat 6 steaks? Probably not. But if you have, a beautiful big steak or salmon or something, and you're eating tons and tons of veggies, you're not going to be wanting all of the other stuff. And I think that's where the real food comes in, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Now, it is possible. I do want to say that at a late stage food addict, somebody who's been, how do we know someone's late stage? They might have looked like they've been bulimic, eating and purging for years. Somebody who's really, really deep in the whole food thing, they might actually say, I can be addicted to steak. I can eat maybe not 6 steaks, but 1 steak and then a burger and then bacon and then cheese. And it's like, it doesn't end, because then we say, maybe this person's got a volume addiction. Like, it's almost like the addiction progresses and then starts to splinter off into all sorts of crazy manifestations that are like, it's not just sugar anymore. But, you don't want to get that far. Quit before you get there.
Yeah, I think, thank you so much for all those tips, because, the quitting, like, it's something we just stew on for ages. Like, okay, well, what do I even do? So what I heard you say was, learn as much as you can, get support, surround yourself with a community, and then do it. And do it. Yeah. Just do it.
Yeah, and do it. And don't wait until you're ready to do it. I mean, there's a certain degree of, yes, you have to wait, but that thing about I'll do it on Monday, well, like when somebody says, okay, I'm ready, but I'll do it on Monday, I usually say, you know what, if you are ready, then do it now, because your readiness now is going to be more than Monday, because you're ready now. When you say I'm going to do it on Monday, that means you're saying I'm ready now. Doing it on Monday is just the addict saying, nah, I don't really want her to stop. I'll do it on Monday, because on Monday you're going to be much less motivated. So when you're ready and you say, okay, I'm ready, but not until, stop, do it right then, even if it's the middle of the day.
I'm laughing because I was there so many times, as I mentioned you were. So, Vera, what's your group called on Facebook?
It's called I'm Sweet Enough, Sugar Free for Life.
I love it. And then tell us a little bit about your book.
Yeah,
where can they find that?
Yeah, the book. Well, you're in. Is it Australia that you are?
Yep.
I don't know how you're going to find it. I don't know.
Well, there's Booktopia and Book Depository. There's Amazon. Is it on Amazon?
It is on Amazon CA and com, Amazon.com. But anyway, so it is on Amazon. It's called Food Junkies: Recovery from Food Addiction, and it's in its second edition. And it covers the science and the clinical and the personal experience of various people. I sort of introduce concepts and then give case studies to illustrate the concepts. It's actually, I think, quite readable. But even for people who are sort of clinicians in the field, it's not dumbed down, but it's also not. It's smart, but it's not over the top. I think it actually is a nice mix of all of them. So people who are familiar with neurochemistry will get it, and the people who don't will get something else out of it. I think it's quite readable, public friendly, about food addiction. So it's about the diagnosis, the actual, am I a food addict? What does my life look like? What are the stages? And then what's the treatment?
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? To dumb down the science, but still have the powerful science behind what the heck is happening to us and why we're here. And your website, they can find you there?
Okay, so I have a website called addictionsunplugged.com, and I also have a YouTube channel, so Vera Tarman, and a lot of my podcasts and lectures and all that stuff are on there. Oh, and by the way, I have a podcast. So the book is Food Junkies: Recovery from Food Addiction, and then the podcast is kind of like a audible version of further chapters of the book. So we interview a lot of researchers that I talk about in the book, but in live, and then more as we go along. So we interviewed Michael Moss, and we interviewed Gary Tobes, and we interviewed all sorts of people asking further questions. And so that podcast is called Food Junkies Podcast, and that's obviously also free. It's a weekly
Amazing.
Podcast. I think it's great.
I had a bit of a listen. It's fantastic. I've been digesting episode by episode. It's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for asking me.
Oh, I'm so privileged. I'm so grateful that you've taken time to out of your busy schedule, because I know how crazy busy you must be. Thank you for putting a unique perspective on food addiction, and hopefully we can chat again in a little while.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.